Hi, this is Paul. It's about 5:15 in the morning. We've had the first day of Midwestuary. Got back to the hotel about 9:30 last night after everything, and briefly went down to the lobby and met with some people and talked, but it was pretty loud, and I had to sort of shout, and I could hear my voice get gravelly, and I knew I had the second day, so I decided I'd just go to bed and feel, had a good night's sleep. Woke up a little bit early, had a lot of thoughts, and so thought I would share some of them. I thought the first day went very, very well. I assume it's being recorded and that the recordings will come out in various ways on various channels at some time. Great. So one of the things that I like about the strategy of having different groups do their own conference is that on one hand there's sort of a tradition that develops between the conferences, and in terms of the larger conferences with myself and Jonathan Peugeot and John Vervaeke, we've had Thunder Bay and Chino and now this. And again, these conferences have sort of grown. Thunder Bay was a little over 100. Chino was about 200. This is maybe 350, and I'm going to be continuing to do a lot of thoughts in terms of the relative size of these conferences. The Midwestuary was about 100 people. I don't know what size Estuary will be. The breakwater events in Europe have been a little bit smaller. But we're playing around with size with respect to these conferences because size very much impacts the feel of the conference. A big conference can be exciting just because of the volume of people, number of new people. I asked in my talk yesterday how many people had come out of the lurk by going to the conference, and there were quite a few. I was thinking that maybe in subsequent conferences we should have medallions or something that we can give to people who have come out of the lurk at a conference so that they could, sort of like AA, except AA, it's a sobriety medallion. This isn't quite as significant, but just some little token that you could give to people that they sort of came to the conference, participated. And again, one of the things that I like about these estuary conferences is that in some ways there's no hiding. If you just come to a conference with 350 people, you can be anonymous in the crowd. You might not meet anybody, but if you come to an estuary conference, you're going to go to a small estuary breakout group, and you're going to be known because you're going to have to introduce yourself. You might pitch, you might point, you might share a little bit of something about yourself. And so it's a significant step out from just being a lurker, from just being a screen watcher. And I noticed last night, I sat down with Bernie and Bonnie Greisen. Bernie was a very early estuary leader, and he leads the estuary in Grand Rapids. And Bonnie's his wife. And they're a great couple. If you guys haven't met Bernie and Bonnie, you really should. But then Paul Rene Nichols sat across the table from us, and Paul Rene knew Bonnie because Paul Rene and Bonnie had been in the same estuary group here at Midwestuary. And Bernie and Bonnie are a little older than I am, but Bonnie is just a delightful host and in some ways a motherly figure. So I just saw her reach out to Paul Rene and touch his hand and welcome him, and you could just feel the warmth and the embrace. And that's exactly why I do this. That's exactly why I want these conferences, because whether this will just be a relationship that they have at this conference and it never goes anywhere, or they meet at another conference, or they correspond in some way. The opportunity and possibility of creating relationships between people, and as Paul's been, Paul had that talk with Nate, And Paul's had it rough. He's either in the middle or he's in the process of a divorce, whether that means that the divorce is fully completed legally, but a divorce is something that takes a while. And actually, I've spoken to a few people here at the conference who are in some stage through a divorce, and I'm hoping to maybe do a conversation. Probably have John Van Donk, maybe Rod Hare, maybe a few other people. We've had a marriage crisis series, and Rod Hare noted that we've never really adequately dealt with divorce. And I think divorce is something that we absolutely have to deal with more, both in terms of the number of people who have had to deal with parental divorce and what that's cost their formation, and also then they themselves going through a divorce and what that does. And one of the reasons I've talked to John Van Donk about this, and he's already agreed to do a video with me on it. John is a good case because John is years from his divorce, and he's years into a second marriage. And second marriages is something that we can talk about too. I don't think our culture has really adequately dealt with and sort of come to terms with the cost of divorce, and then even the reality of let's say second marriages or second divorces or third divorces, because they are certainly out there too. So again, just coming to an event like this, for me, I can talk to people over Zoom. I can begin relationships with people, but it's a different thing coming into a space now, having had some relationships build over Zoom, and then, or even over Twitter, X, but then you come to a place and I get a chance to sit down face to face, because when you're sitting face to face, you can feel the emotions. The three-dimensional face is much more real than the two-dimensional face, and you can just connect, obviously, on a deeper level in that way. So other impressions, the estuary groups, even though, because this is a large conference, and just the challenge of deploying 34 estuary groups, and because we've had the construction of this conference, we had all of the keynotes today, and then no question and answer after, and 2 estuary sessions, and an introductory one and a second one. And again, these estuary, the impact of these estuary sessions are cumulative. So here in day one, people are beginning to sense the power of those estuary sessions, but I suspect that will really be felt tomorrow. After the estuary sessions, I go and I sort of work the room, and I talk to just about everybody I can, and I say, how is your estuary going? There's a couple here that for a couple of years lived in Berkeley and drove to Living Stones every Sunday. Berkeley to Living Stones, that was an hour and a half. And they're really committed people with respect to estuary. They're really committed people with something else I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And so they're estuary veterans. Another person that's here from my local Sacramento estuary, very much a estuary veteran and a estuary leader and a sort of a hardcore believer in the estuary process. He's just having a great time. I saw him last night downstairs at the hotel, and I could just see him just around building relationships with the people here. And so for me, that is exactly what I want these conferences to do, whether they're sort of the 350 size, which I don't know, is this sort of the upper limit? That was a debate that happened on, was it Chad's channel before Estuary, or let's say the Northwestuary size of 100, or even smaller conferences. But that, again, knitting together of the personal relationships that in this time of the internet, we can use the internet whether it's live streams or randos conversations or conversations that aren't recorded, friendships that are developed and carried on over Discord servers, et cetera, et cetera. It's that kind of knitting together that is so important. John Vervaeke, John is different. And John brought a different energy to this conference than he did to the other two conferences, I felt. Now, there's going to be a lot of talk about John's speech because, I mean, John is always technical and scientific and has his, as Job called them, fancy Vervaeke words. I really liked Jonathan and John's speech yesterday. And, after you give us Keynote like that, there's usually a question as a speaker. Did that work? How well did it impact? All of these things. And these are all the challenges that pastors are very used to because we do this every week. I'm sure college professors to a degree are, but lecturing to a room, depending on the size of the room, at a university is a little bit different from, let's say, preaching in a church. But I really liked both John and Jonathan's keynotes because I think they both gave sort of state of their program speeches. Jonathan started out saying, I'm really going to take you to the edge. This is going to be challenging. But I thought what John really did in his speech was give a good overall package of what I see him as the king of the formal cause, or the king of, John Vervaeke is sort of taking Aristotle's four causes. He added a fifth, the paradigmatic cause, and said, and I think that's right. So the formal cause and the paradigmatic cause, sort of the same thing. And I think when I look at what Peugeot is doing with, coming down from above, that causality from above, which John Vervaeke talked about quite a bit, and there's going to be more about this coming out. Jonathan and John are going to have I'm not going to spoil it right now, but are going to have a conversation with someone who's sort of been corner adjacent, someone that Karen Wong really sort of brought into the conversation. And so when John and Jonathan have that conversation with this person who right away Karen Wong saw, this is a person that's going to have a profound impact in terms of how we understand science and the world, in terms of the return of the formal cause, or maybe the revelation of the paradigmatic cause. So that's coming with John and Jonathan. I got that from them, and I'm super excited about that. So I hope that happens. But both of them, I thought, gave great talks in terms of, if you've never really sort of understood it, this is sort of a nice 2025 state of their dominant, one of their dominant themes reassessment. And I thought both of them gave great talks. Elizabeth Oldfield's talk really, I think, rocked a lot of people in the crowd. I wasn't able to go to the first Estuary session because that was right in the morning and people were still sort of coming in, and I was sort of connecting with people initially and felt that that's what I should do and help people find their groups. And then I had the first Keynote, which was after that, so I didn't get, but I decided to pick an Estuary group because I was going to go to one. I wasn't going to float. I wanted to be embedded in one, and so I saw Dr. Jim, and I really love Dr. Jim and have a tremendous respect for Dr. Jim's perspective. Rod Hare and Dr. Jim, to me, are sort of two non-platform elder statesmen and wise men of this movement, because they're a little older than average. They both have, way before the coroner, they both have had a lot of experience working the kinds of things that we talk about. And so when Rod Hare and Dr. Jim, when they talk, I listen because they have a lot of wisdom. And they're also both good for me because, Dr. Jim and his relationship with Christianity, he's done some videos recently and he's substacking where he's really processing that. And so I think they're both super important voices. And Rod Hare, one of the things I appreciate about Rod is that, it's quite clear that that many people in terms of the whole corner movement have been moving progressively towards Christianity. And Rod has had his own wrestlings with Christianity. Someone that was in his Estuary group, and she said to me, "I'm in Rod's Estuary group," and he shared his story, which of course in an Estuary group with a smaller group of people, you can share things that aren't appropriate to necessarily share on the internet, let's say, to a certain degree. And she was so excited because she could understand Rod and understand where he's coming from. And I really see Rod as an important voice when at a certain shallow level, if we get too Christian-y, Rod is going to really check us in terms of, are you guys, don't get too high on your own supply here. There's huge challenges that you can just sort of run fast and loose with. And, it's humanities, as I said in my talk, it's humanities. One way to understand sin is this propensity to overreach. And both Rod and Dr. Jim, in my mind, are two voices that are really going to help us not overreach to the degree that we can. So they were super, I'm so glad that they're both here. They're both super, super important. I think elder statesmen, elder brothers in this movement, because they have voices and they use them and they're full of wisdom. And part of what happens with age is, and certain kinds of temperament, you don't get too carried away in your enthusiasm. You have a certain sober judgment because you've seen enthusiasm and flashes in the pan before, and you're not going to sort of ride that wave. So it's super good having them here and having them embedded in Estuary groups. And again, with a conference like this, the desire to quickly scale is always with us. And this won't, these guys and others won't let that happen because they can disclose in a little Estuary group. And again, you might see their contribution and think, I want to bring this to everyone, which is what I'm doing right now with this video. But it unfolds in a different way in that little group of 10 or 11 people in their Estuary group. Today, we're going to do some things. No more keynotes, more Estuary times, more interaction with the broader crowd. Again, one of the things that I really like about, I've been feeling my way through this whole movement in terms of trying to lead it and encourage it. And again, a big part of my strategy has been distributed leadership. And I know early on that was controversial. A lot of people really wanted me to sort of create a centralized thing, say a PVK. I don't know, how centralized is the symbolic world? I think John's effort is a little bit more conscious, but partly just because, again, of the difference of my employment system, where I've been primarily committed and connected to a local church. This is distributed, and different Estuary groups, and maybe like Chicago non-Estuary groups, plus Chad, they create the conference they want, and they take risks in terms of having all the keynotes in day one, not doing Q&A after the keynotes, playing around with how to involve in a plenary session in a big room, how to involve the whole audience in the in what's happening on stage, because again, a lot of what we're dealing with is size. I think with the John Vervaeke recently just had a video on the trust crisis, and I might get a chance to bring that in. The last session of the conference is myself and John and Jonathan, and I'm already sort of compiling a list of things that maybe we can talk about. Then again, when the three of us get together, there's no lack of talking. So, but I've already got some things on my mind, and that's part of the reason that I was laying in bed and just relaxing and feeling refreshed and thinking about the day. I had some thoughts, but I don't know how the day is going to roll out, so I don't know if my thoughts are going to get out. And so if I don't record them, they might not get out. I could write them down, but that's all I've had the privilege of spending more time with Rod Dreher today yesterday than I really ever have before. And we've got a chance to talk. Dreher, of course, was quite formative in terms of the thinking about my channel before I ever started it, in that I was reading Rod and appreciating what he was doing sort of in the book journalism world. And I thought there really needs to be something like that in the video world. And so my channel has been impacted by Rod's blog. So it's really been an awesome opportunity to get to know Rod, and I hope that over time he and I can deepen that relationship, and we'll see where that goes. But one of the things, there's a few things on my mind. John Vervaeke had just done this video with Jordan Hall and somebody else on the trust crisis, and I thought his conversation with Bishop Maximus with respect to not foundationalism, presuppositionalism. I mentioned that a little bit in one of the videos that I did last week. That came up a little bit from John. I'm really happy to see this reappreciation for presuppositions rather than foundations. I think that's a better frame to understand how they work. And of course, there's a long tradition in Reformed theology of presuppositionalism. You can very much see that in the work of Alvin Plantinga, of course, Van Til, a very famous conservative Reformed theologian with respect to presuppositionalism, and that very much impacted certain conservative brands of Reformed theology. So it's good to see that coming. But this question of the trust crisis, which is so foundational to the meaning crisis, because the meaning crisis is all about people's ability to connect into deep and productive and life-giving friendships and relationships. So it's connected to the marriage crisis and what's happening with divorce and the destruction of the family. All of those things are connected. And then yesterday, towards the end of the evening, it was very interesting because John Vervaeke came out with a very strong message against LLMs. And that's something that we're going to have to sort of process and chew on, because it's not going to be the case that you can just already, if you do a search with Google or Bing, the LLMs are already involved in that search. And so as we continue to live with LLMs, and John's obviously come to some conclusions about that, again, I believe all of this is recorded, so if you're not here, my hope is that you'll have a chance to hear the sessions, because I think, as with the other conferences that we've had, and partly because of the size of this conference and the people that are at this conference, this conference, again, is, I think, bringing forward the conversation in a really important way. So it's important that the videos get out so that more of you beyond can appreciate what's going on at this conference. But John made a very strong, he said, I won't use LLMs, and as long as possible, so he made that statement, and what's been interesting is with let's say the coming of orthodoxy, and part of orthodoxy and its appeal is a visual departure from, let's say, what people have been accustomed to with Catholicism in terms of Renaissance imagery, but especially a departure from modernist imagery in churches. And so when you go to ARC, or even at this conference, I haven't had a chance to talk to them or meet them. Maybe I'll get a chance today. These conferences, just because of where I fit in this movement, they're intensely busy for me, because I have to sort of at the same time renew old, continue to develop relationships, which means people I've spoken with on Rando's Conversations, new people that I'm meeting here, people who are coming out of the lurk, people who want to say thank you, people who want to begin to at least hope to begin a conversation or a relationship. And so these conferences are very intense and very rich for me. I love it. But especially a larger conference, where as opposed to, let's say, the retreat, the Estuary retreat size thing, where I'm with a dozen people doing something. Now, just because of what's happening at Living Stones and the rollout, I was thinking about, and the timing, I was thinking about doing an Estuary retreat this fall at my sister's place. I'm no longer planning on that, partly because of my sister's schedule. Maybe what I need to do is start planning a spring one, and get that on the calendar with my sister. She has other events that she does at her house, and so I have to get in early, because she has some of the key holidays. Because she doesn't have air conditioning, and because it's sort of quasi outside, because staying at my sister's is sort of like glamping, it's really, there's a narrow window where either you're not going to bake or you're not going to freeze. And my first two retreats at her house, we froze, at least those, especially some who lived in some. So I want to get that straight, but I also have to maybe I have to start doing some in Sacramento. Again, we've been talking about retreats in Sacramento. I don't know if the state of the church is going to impact Sacramento retreats or conferences. We sort of have to really stake out the nomenclature of what's becoming a multi-level size-wise. So Estuary retreats, it's sort of easy, let's say with a dozen people. And then a conference can be 100, 50 or 100, or right now up to 350. We don't know the upper end of it. We don't know. We're still thinking about scale and how that impacts it. So John Vervaeke comes out with this strong anti-LLM statement. And it was so interesting, because when he said it, I heard the voice of a certain kind of fundamentalism. And I'm not cheap-shotting him by any means, because it's different. 19th and 20th century fundamentalism that grew out of the modernist fundamentalist wars, fights. I had to talk with Roger about this word war, and I'm going to have to continue to think about that. But struggles within the church, that of course was a deep part of John's formation. An aspect of that fundamentalism very much was an aspect of epistemology, that fundamentalists had unconsciously and implicitly absorbed aspects of modernism, but applied it in an anti-modern way to create a whole set of theological consequences and social posturing. But there's a key element of fundamentalist communities was the counterculturalism of those communities. And so when John Vervaeke makes a strong anti-LLM statement, there's an echo of fundamentalism in there. And again, given how he was formed in his community, This is true of all of us. This is why conservatives are never as conservative as they think, and progressives are never as progressive as they think. You never lose certain aspects of that fundamentalist culture. And that's good because there's a counterculturality to that. And that's why, let's say, in the counterculture, in American counterculture, there is a bohemian conservatism in that counterculture. And so that bohemian conservatism, it was sort of a conservative element in this counterculture that was supposed to in some ways be progressive. And you see that in various progressivisms. Various progressivisms have within them a certain cultural fundamentalist posture. And these kinds of fundamentalist postures are breaking out all over. You see it in the Benedict option. So when we're talking about it on stage, Rod very strongly brought up the Benedict option and said, it's not really understood. Maybe losing my voice now too, and I don't want to edit, so I don't want to stop the recording. Grab my water bottle, yeah. Oh, my mic's still on, so you can still hear me. Got to keep my eye on the time because I usually try to do breakfast right away after I wake up, and then I have a little bit of time to sort of do some devotions and collect myself before the day goes. But it was very interesting in listening to John and just sensing some of his roots. There's a real strength to these countercultural movements. And again, you look at someone like Doug Wilson, there's deep fundamentalism in there in some ways, and it's countercultural. And it is in the Benedict option, and it is in orthodoxy. I don't think, so as I was saying, when you go to ARC and you see an Orthodox cleric walk through the room at ARC, and again, especially at ARC because ARC was sort of set in this very sterile airport, I forget what word Mary Harrington used, but it was right. It was very airport context. And because when I would go there as a minister, even as a Protestant minister who doesn't wear a collar, and we're not a vestment tradition, but even when I went to ARC, this is, clothing matters. And when I do, let's say, even synod at the Christian Reformed Church, in my grandfather's generation, if you would go to synod, you wouldn't necessarily wear a clerical collar, but you'd probably wear a suit. And then part of what happens in the counterculture in America and sort of the dressing down and the casualism and the pushback against certain formalisms in American culture. Now, if you go to synod, synodical delegates are wearing shorts. In fact, in the last few years, synod has been trying to encourage delegates not to dress down too far because we're streaming. So it's sort of if you go to the CRC synod, the dressings are business casual. And so it'll, just look out. Some people speculated what I would be wearing here, and it's like, I brought my uniform. And I was a little underdressed for the feast. That it was, I sat next to John Hare for the Tamada, the Supra, and the Georgian feast. Oh, it was so much fun. I had such a good time. Of course, if I'm sitting next to John Hare and then another friend of mine who was on the other side, if I'm sitting next to these guys, I am going to have a great time. And I know it's known that I don't drink, but I don't drink coffee, but whenever I was visiting Haitians, they would offer me coffee. I would always drink their coffee, even though I don't care for coffee. And so what was I going to do at this? I very probably unwisely sometimes call it an Orthodox drinking game, which it isn't. It's a deeply religious festival. Really enjoyed I really enjoyed it. And so I drank, and I did get drunk. A lot of sipping with my little toasts, but I so enjoyed it. I enjoyed it immensely. And so next time I get invited to one, I'm gonna go. Maybe, yeah, we'll see what happens with my schedule in Living Stones, and if I can go to more things. But at the same time, I don't want to spend my life traveling. It's not necessarily good for my marriage and my family. So, because I missed, my wife's birthday was 2 days ago, and I missed it. Well, she was busy with school too, so, but still, it wasn't ideal to not be home for my wife's birthday. And that, traveling comes at a cost. And whenever, now John and Jonathan's lives have changed significantly since Thunder Bay. And so I always talk to them about some of these things when we get together to sort of, maintain the relationship. And, Jordan Peterson's story is, I think, in some ways a cautionary tale with respect to the status rocket and disruption of his life. And John and Jonathan are very aware of that. And they haven't been subject to the kind of fame and notoriety that Jordan was, and I think thankfully so. And both of them are working really hard to try to balance these things. But it's tremendously difficult because these are powerful forces in the world and in our life. But anyway, back to the fundamentalist thing. When you see Orthodox clergy walking through the ark space with their full regalia, there's a new fundamentalism there. It's not the modernist fundamentalist thing, but there are elements of that countercultural. And I think a big part of the traditional Catholic, Anglican to a degree, Anglicans are an estuary type church, in that they're not Catholic, they're not Protestant, they're not this, they're not that. They haven't given everything up. But they've tried to incorporate, and of course, Church of England is all over the map. So I'm not really quite sure what Anglicanism is, quite frankly. But Orthodoxy, we've gone from Spartan places to, Orthodox churches are, you go to a Catholic church, yeah. You go to an Orthodox church, it's like, bang. It's a visual, iconographic, imagistic assault, especially if you're a low church Protestant like me who comes from an iconoclastic tradition. And so there's a lot of Benedict optioning, and that's not just going to be religious. So when John Vervaeke makes this strong, dramatic, I am not going to use LLMs, there's a fundamentalism that's emerging in that. And, on one hand, if you see the Orthodox wearing their beards long and changing even with clergy and non-clergy laity, how much different is that from Amish, Mennonite, Hutterite, who continue to separate themselves from the culture? And because of the development of cyberspace and will your engagement with technology and internet technology create new fundamentalisms, even ones that aren't necessarily deeply tied to historic religious roots? And I think the answer is yes. So that came out. And so if I get a chance when I have my conversation with John and Jonathan, that's something I want to bring up, because when John said that, it's like, you don't leave those fundamentalist roots completely. They're in your formation. When I think about the age to come, I think it's analogous in some ways to, we have this formation in childhood, and I'll never lose either my Dutch Calvinist roots that come through the CRC side of my tradition. I wonder to what degree, especially in my father's family of origin, there's some deep Jewishness that, because my father was always a little different, and my grandfather was a little different, and we've never, in a way, we've never fully been completely, let's say, core Christian Reformed. We've always been Christian Reformed, but a little different. This openness that my grandfather and father had, which has come through me, and I think has been part of my contribution to this whole movement. I spoke a bit about my father at the Supra in my toasts, and Rod Hare, who was at it. And if you were, I'm almost gonna cry now. Rod Hare stood up and toasted my father. That's after John Heers had sort of set that up and said, you know, in a Georgian culture, if you want to toast someone, if you want to esteem someone, you stand up and you toast their father. It's a triangle Trinitarian indirect way, which so many cultures are so good at. And Rod Hare toasted my father, and that moved me deeply. I think about my father often. I should probably do a video on my relationship with my father, because that might be helpful for a lot of people. Because as every relationship with a father, it was complex. But my father is so, again, we're talking about the multitudes within, and so my father is a big part of me. And when I do these things, I can't help but have think about my father. And that was very true of the Supra. I don't drink, but my father did. He didn't drink to excess at all. We didn't have alcohol in the house growing up, hardly at all. But if someone would offer my father a glass of wine, he would enjoy it. And I remember when the first time they came to the Dominican Republic, my father and mother come off the plane, and rum is a very big deal in the Dominican Republic. And I don't think my father had ever had any rum, but my father would never turn down offered food from almost anyone. And so they got off the plane and they were giving, little glasses of rum. And of course, my mother, she could probably smell the alcohol. So, but my father, why, yes, he drank it. And I remember seeing him, he said, they offered us this little, it was sweet and it was delicious. He really enjoyed the rum. Just had one little glass. But so that he wasn't a big drinker at all, but when offered, he enjoyed it. He enjoyed feasts. But I think about the way that my father comes through me, and so my particular aspect of Christian reformity that was played out in obviously my grandfather's ministry, and the unique ministry that my father, helped form in Paterson, New Jersey, which was a big part of this racial reconciliation movement that went through the Christian Reformed Church in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I mean, my father was integral in that. And also in the, the march of March, look at the word I used. Wow, they just come out. Women in church office, which of course is going to be controversial hearing this, but, my father's openness, it's in me. And so even though he died in 2013 and didn't get a chance to participate in any of this TLC Estuary, he would have loved this. I say this often to my mother and my sister. My father would have been watching these videos. He would have been on Zoom calls. He wasn't real good with technology. So I would have had to set him up with a camera. My sister is good with technology too, and so we would have set him up. But he would have been doing randos conversations. Oh, he would have been doing 5 or 10 a week. He died at a restaurant with somebody else, being a pastor. The waitress came and said, "Do you want coffee?" And he paused, and he went to that coffee shop a lot, and the waitress stopped like, "You never pause." And then he dropped dead at that moment of a heart attack. And, as I said in his eulogy, you can find my eulogy for him on this channel. You just have to dig back deep enough. I don't know what playlist it's in. But if you go Paul Vanderklay, Stan Vanderklay eulogy, you can find the eulogy on my channel. But, he fell asleep. I'm going to cry again. It's emotional doing this. It's tiring, and so, your emotions come up. It's tiring in a great way, but it's also emotional because, I talk to people on the internet, I get a sense of their story, and so I come to something like this, and they're both moments of joy when I see people that I haven't seen for a while, and when they tell me a happy story. There are babies here. One of the biggest thing about this conference is so pro-baby. And I can divulge this. In my little Estuary group, one of the things was that a couple was in it, and they announced that she's pregnant, and the whole group lights up. If there's a dominant if there's fertility suppression in the culture, oh boy, there's fertility celebration at the Midwestuary. And Chad brings his baby out, and we're like, we get to see the baby. And another couple brought their little baby girl here. She's so beautiful. And every now and then she's crying. And I told the parents, I said, in this conference, when people hear your baby cry, through the walls and from another room, joy is going to come forward. Because So there's no fertility suppression going on here. There's fertility celebration, and I'm super happy about that. And Jacob Federecci will be very happy about that. And so me and my rabbit trails. So my father would absolutely love this. And so, I don't know the degree to which, this is an Orthodox Catholic Protestant conversation. I don't know the degree to which my father, as the great cloud of witnesses, is participating. Gosh, I wake up in the morning, make a weepy video. I don't know the degree to which my father is participating in. He's certainly doing it through me. But I think he's celebrating in heaven at so much of what's happening down here below with the randos and the relationships. My father had a very vital youth ministry, which was very quiet and pastoral. At his calling hours, I think 800 people show up to his calling hours. We had to have this big line, and we spent like 3 hours with everybody coming through in little Whitensville, Massachusetts. But some of the stories that came through were a lot of young people that said, "Your father met with me and listened to me and really helped me." And so, whether it's through me or in some ways participation from above, my father's all through this. And my grandfather. Oh boy. So we don't lose our roots. And even the pain in our story can be redeemed. Parts of, the pain doesn't go away completely, but it can be transformed. That joy can subsume the ache of pain Oh, it's after 6 o'clock. Breakfast is starting. I should land the plane on this soon. I also don't know how well the upload's going to go on this. I'll have to see. I'm just doing it on my phone. Christian Baxter was doing some interviews on his phone. I'm working to travel lighter and do this. So, yeah. So I guess report day 1 Midwestuary. It's been great. I think today's going to be great. I'm really happy. Even though I'm crying. Crying happy. Good thing. All right. Leave a comment.